Common Sense and Nuclear Warfare by Bertrand Russell. Read by the author. Chapter 7. Steps towards Conciliation. Let us suppose a situation reached in which East and West alike are convinced that a nuclear war would be a disaster to all parties, and that steps for the preservation of peace, if they were possible, would be supremely desirable. The obstacles to a peaceful policy are of various kinds. First and foremost is mutual fear and the suspicion of bad faith on the other side. The second obstacle is a fear of loss of faith. Neither side can bear to appear forced into concessions. A third difficulty, which is much emphasized but does not seem to me so grave as the other two, is the ideological dispute. A great many people on each side believe that the way of life for which their side stands is vastly better than the other, and that nothing whatever must be done to give the other a chance of global success. I think a policy of conciliation, if it is to win the support of the powerful, must take account of these difficulties and look for measures by which they may be minimized. I do not know whether such measures will be adopted, and if they are, I do not know from what they will take. I do not know what form they will take. In what follows, I make suggestions as to a possible course that conciliation might take, but without wishing to insist upon just these measures if others having the same purpose were found more acceptable. Perhaps the first should be a solemn pronouncement by the states in both blocks that by any others that can join in, to the effect that war could not serve the purposes of any of the signatory powers, and that measures for preventing it are, therefore, urgently to be desired. This should be accompanied, or immediately followed, by a standstill agreement stipulating that, during some specified period of time, no power on either side would attempt to alter status quo or engage in any provocative measures. The next step should be the appointment of a conciliation committee, not intended to have any powers, but to explore possible measures for the diminution of tension. I think that if this committee is to be effective in its deliberations, it must be small. I should suggest 2 Americans, 2 Russians, 1 West European, 1 Chinese, and 2 neutrals. The 2 neutrals might, perhaps with advantage, be an Indian and the other a Swede, since this would secure that, on the whole, one should lean towards the east and the other towards the west. It would be essential that the members of this committee should have the confidence of their respective governments, since otherwise their recommendations would not carry weight. During the period of their deliberations, which could not be very brief, they should have no other duties whatever. One of the difficulties in the modern world is that all policymakers are too busy to be able to acquaint themselves with more than a small proportion of the facts upon which policy ought to be based. If the Conciliation Committee is not to suffer from this defect, its members must be liberated from both administrative burdens and from daily pressures of public opinion. It would be desirable for all the members of the committee to meet together in daily contact, not only in a business way, but also socially. If, at some period of tension, the 3 Western members and the 3 Eastern members were to find themselves in such violent disagreement as to make discussion and social relations difficult, it should be the function of the 2 neutrals to smooth things over and bring both camps into a more tolerant mood. It should be understood that from the first agreement that it should be understood that agreement, rather than diplomatic victory, should be sought by such member of the committee. It would be an essential condition of success that discussions should be confidential and that nothing should be published without unanimous consent of all members. If this condition were not observed, it would be impossible for any member during a debate to make a tentative concession which subsequent course of the debate might make inopportune. It will also make it very difficult for a member to avoid such opinions and such rhetoric as would win applause from the nation he represented. I think, however, that unanimous decisions, if any were reached, should be given the widest publicity in all the countries concerned. Certain principles would have to be laid down as conditions for any acceptable agreements. The first and most absolute of these must be the conciliatory measures as a whole must give no net advantage to either side. The reason why this condition is so imperative is that there must be no temptation on either side to prefer war to suggest measures of conciliation. If fear, it is probable that any suggestion which genuinely satisfies this condition will appear to each side to be giving too much to the other. It will be the function of the two neutral members to satisfy themselves that there is a balance of concessions by the two sides, and, having satisfied themselves, to proceed to the persuasion of the other members. The second principle that should govern the deliberations of the committee is to seek ways of diminishing frictions in difficult regions. What this demands, as a rule, in some decisions which both sides agree to enforce at will and which will, therefore, be practically irrevocable. Friction that arises in various regions is fostered by uncertainty and by rivalries between East and West. If these were eliminated, most of the present dangers in such regions would disappear. The third principle, which, however, should be subordinate to the other two, is that, wherever possible, the wishes of the inhabitants should be respected. For various reasons, this cannot be made an absolute principle. If, to take a fantastic example, there were a majority of communists in Panama, one could not expect the United States to surrender the canal to friends of Moscow. I will not give less fantastic examples for fear of rousing controversial passions. I should hope that, after a suitable period of discussion, the Conciliation Committee would produce a draft agreement dealing with all the important points in which the interests of the East and West are thought to conflict. I do not suggest that any government should commit itself in advance to accepting any of the proposals of the Conciliation Committee, but I believe and hope that their proposals, when widely publicized, would form a nucleus about which sane opinion could quickly crystallize. Their proposals would have the merit of impartiality and of offering the best terms that any government could reasonably expect. The mere fact of a suggested agreement endorsed by representatives of East and West alike would almost inevitably have a profound effect upon public opinion, and would give to the friends of peace a policy that could not be suspected of unduly favouring either side. Many people will doubt whether such a committee, as I have been suggesting, would be able to reach any kind of agreement. It will be said that the chasm between East and West is too wide to be bridged by discussion, and that even if the committee reached agreements, the national governments on each side would repudiate them as involving intolerable concessions. I do not think that this would be the case if the dangers of the nuclear war had been adequately appreciated. Both sides realize that they are faced by a common danger. Agreement is often found to be much easier than had been thought. I will give an illustration from an event which occurred little more than half a century ago. Britain and Russia had hated and feared each other ever since the Crimean War, but after over 50 years of mutual suspicion, they came to the conclusion that each side had less to fear from the other than from Germany, and, in the year 1907, they concluded that Entente, by which an end was put to all divergences between their policies. This happened through the common fear of Germany, a fear far less dreadful than the fear of nuclear warfare. It is profoundly unfortunate that the danger of nuclear warfare is regarded nationally rather than humanly. The East fears Western armaments, the West fears those of the East. In fact, the armaments of the East and West alike threaten West and East equally. It is obvious to anyone who has time to consider the matter, and who is not obsessed by the nationalist ambitions of foreign officers. If it were apprehended by the statesmen of East and West alike, the differences at present dividing the two blocks would soon be found no more insufferable than those that divided Britain and Russia before 1907. For these reasons, I cannot despair of the success of such conciliatory deliberations as I have been suggesting.